What if I told you that some of the greatest players in NBA history, Luka Dončić, Kobe Bryant, Dirk Nowitzki, were all traded on draft night? Yep, some teams had a future Hall of Famer in their hands and gave them away before they even played a game. Sometimes draft night trades change the league forever. Other times, they leave fans asking, what were they thinking? So today, we're breaking down the 10 biggest draft night trades in NBA history, the ones that shaped dynasties, created legends, and left teams regretting their decisions for decades. So let's get into it. Starting off, we're going to be talking about the Luka Dončić-Trae Young swap in 2018. In 2018, the Hawks had Luka Dončić on their roster for about 5 minutes, but instead of keeping the Slovenian superstar, they traded him to Dallas for Trae Young and a future first-round pick. Now, to be fair, Trae Young is a star, but Luka is an MVP caliber player, putting up insane numbers and carrying the Mavs to deep playoff runs. Who won the trade? Well, right now, it looks like Dallas took over Atlanta in that trade, but who knows? Especially after Luka was just traded to the Lakers, that complicates things in this trade forever. Does that mean that the Hawks officially won this trade? I don't know. Let me know down below what you guys think about this one, because this one has the most that could change over the span of the next 5 or 10 years. We'll have to wait and see what happens with the rest of this trade now that Luka is officially a Laker. Next up, we're going to be talking about the Kobe Bryant trade, which I'm sure you guys are all aware of, probably the most famous draft day trade of all time. Imagine having Kobe Bryant, a 17-year-old phenom at that point, who would go on to win 5 championships, and trading him before he even played a game. That's exactly what the Charlotte Hornets did in 1996. They drafted Kobe at number 13, then sent him to the Lakers for Vlade Divac, a solid center, but let's be honest, most of you guys have probably never heard of him, and they traded him for one of the best players of all time in Kobe Bryant. The result, the Lakers would go on and build a dynasty, and the Hornets have never recovered since this trade, almost 30 years ago at this point. And this might be the biggest draft night trade robbery of all time when we look at exactly what happened. The third one we're going to be looking at is the Dirk Nowitzki trade. Now, in 1998, the Milwaukee Bucks had Dirk Nowitzki, but instead of keeping him, they traded him to Dallas for Robert Traylor. Let me say that again. Dirk Nowitzki for Robert of a Maverick, and it was interesting that at one point he wasn't even on the roster, even if it was for a few minutes. He was not drafted a Maverick, which is interesting to think about. But Bucks fans wondering what could have happened if they had Dirk Nowitzki. But obviously, they would end up getting a power forward later that would change their franchise forever in Giannis Antetokounmpo. Next up, we're going to be talking about the Ray Allen trade in 1996, a very eventful year for draft night trades. The Minnesota Timberwolves could have had Ray Allen, who was arguably the greatest shooter of all time before a man named Steph Curry came around, but instead, they traded him on draft night for Stephon Marbury. You know, this trade, very different from the last few, as many of you guys probably know who Stephon Marbury was, had a very solid career, but didn't really last long in Minnesota. That's why I bring it up. Meanwhile, Ray Allen became a Hall of Famer, won 2 championships, and hit arguably the most clutch shot of all time in the 2013 finals. And safe to say, I'm sure the Wolves probably wish that they kept Ray Allen, though Marbury would be a solid player. Like I said, he just wouldn't last that long in Minnesota. Next up, we're going to be talking about the Kevin Garnett trade in 1995. That almost happened. Technically, this one didn't happen, but it almost did, so I'm going to include it on the list here to bring a little bit of a difference from the other ones. 1995, Kevin Garnett was actually almost traded to the Lakers on draft night, which would have changed things forever. The Lakers were offering Vlade Divac to Minnesota for their draft picks. Sound familiar? It's the same deal that I just talked about, which would have landed them Kobe Bryant. That's why I brought it up. At the last second, the Wolves decided to keep their pick and take Garnett, who went on to become the greatest player in franchise history up to this point, in my opinion. Imagine if KG and Kobe had been teammates from the start. NBA history could have been very, very different. Number 6, we have the Scottie Pippen trade in 1987. In 1987, the Supersonics drafted Scottie Pippen with a number 5 overall pick. Then they traded him to Chicago for Olden Poyelnais. That's right. Meanwhile, Pippen went on to become Michael Jordan's right-hand man, won 6 championships, and became one of the greatest two-way players ever. Seattle never won a title before their franchise moved to OKC. Would things have been different if they had kept Pippen? Maybe, but we do know that the Bulls definitely won this trade. Number 7, we have a trade which I just talked about in my last video, the Celtics and Nets 2013 trade that would end up killing Brooklyn's team for a long time. This is one of the biggest trade disasters in NBA history, and on draft night in 2013, the Nets traded their future for aging stars, and their idea of this trade did not pan out the way that they hoped it would have. They sent 3 first-round picks to Boston for Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and Jason Terry, players that were well past their prime, but Brooklyn was willing to look past that, hoping that they could build a big 3 there. The result, well, the Nets just did not play very well after this. Their big 3 would not work out very well. The opposite side, Boston used those picks to draft Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, which, as we know, would result in a championship last season in 2024, and would also help build this Celtics team up to become what they are today. And meanwhile, for Brooklyn, they have had a history of big 3s not working out so well after this, and it seems like they just can't avoid that at this point. Next, we have the Jimmy Butler trade in 2017. On draft night 2017, the Bulls decided to blow it all up and trade their best player, Jimmy Butler, to Minnesota for Zach LaVine, Chris Dunn, and Lauri Markkanen. At first, it seemed like the Wolves won the trade. Jimmy led them to the playoffs for the first time in over a decade. But just a year later, it all fell apart. Butler called out his teammates, got traded again, and the Wolves were back to square one. Meanwhile, the Bulls slowly rebuilt with LaVine and Markkanen, but never became a franchise again to the success that they would have in the 90s. As we know, the Bulls were still struggling during that time period, though they felt like they were building something good. As we know, Jimmy would end up getting traded a few times after that from Minnesota, and Zach LaVine, as we know, would stay with Chicago for a long time before he was just traded at this year's deadline. And really, in the end, neither team really got helped too much from this trade overall. Next, we have the Spurs, who stole Kawhi Leonard in 2011. The Indiana Pacers had Kawhi Leonard in their hands, but instead of keeping him, they traded him to San Antonio for George Hill. At the time, Hill was a solid point guard, but nothing special. Meanwhile, Kawhi became a 2-time Finals MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, and one of the best two-way players of all time. The Pacers, they would stay competitive, but never reached the finals. Meanwhile, the Spurs won another championship and built a bridge to the post-Tim Duncan era. I would say this trade was a massive win for San Antonio and a painful what-if for Indiana. Finally, we have the Andrew Wiggins-Kevin Love trade in 2014. In 2014, the Cavs would draft Andrew Wiggins #1 overall, but he never played a game in Cleveland. Instead, the Cavs flipped him for Kevin Love, completing their big 3 with LeBron James and Kyrie Irving, as LeBron would go back and they would find that 3rd star for him, and it was a perfect move for Cleveland. They would end up getting their championship. LeBron would fulfill his promise to the city of Cleveland, and on the opposite side, Wiggins would take years to develop, and he really wouldn't find too much success until he would get to Golden State, winning a title in 2022, also becoming an all-star while he was there as well. Both sides got what they needed, but Cleveland definitely got the immediate reward in the end, and I would say Andrew Wiggins just really didn't develop during his time while he was over there after he got traded as well. Now that concludes our video today. Some of the biggest draft night trades, draft night what-ifs, or in some cases, guys that were drafted by a team and wouldn't end up playing for them. Maybe they weren't traded exactly on draft night. But let me know which one you think is the biggest mistake from a franchise in this video, or maybe one that I didn't mention that you guys want to bring up down below. If you haven't yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and I hope you guys check out another video and come back and leave a comment down below, like that video as well, and I'll see you guys in the next one.